Hi, today I am so thrilled to be here with author F Saxby from Sydney, Australia. And this is, I love being able to speak to, see, I'm goofing up here. I love to be able to speak to people from across the pond. It's interesting. So Jean, introduce yourself to us and just tell us a little bit about you.
Okay, thank you very much, Jennifer, for having me on. Well, I'm an author. I have a science degree and a diploma of education, and I was a teacher librarian for around 30 years and a teacher before that. And I have 3 children and 3 grandchildren, and now I'm mainly an author and something I've always loved to do. I did start into my publishing career as an illustrator of 3 cookbooks, which was a wonderful experience. My editor was Lisa Highton, who's now in the UK.
Well,
And
stop it 1 minute there. I want to know how that happened. I mean, cookbooks, you think about people taking pictures of food, but illustrating cookbooks, that's interesting.
okay, so this happened. This is a long time ago that I did this, and it was very popular to have cookbooks with little black pen and ink sketches
Oh.
of the ingredients and the dishes. And I actually did 3 years part-time of an art certificate as well. So I was really I'd had a lot of practice, and I've always loved art and drawing. And I don't do it now, but I use that with my love of images. And I use Canva, and I've even used Midjourney. And I use images a lot in my work. So I knew someone who was writing the cookbooks, and I showed her what I could do, and she said, "Oh, that's exactly what I want." So I had a wonderful experience. They were actually published internationally, and I actually got good money for those. I think illustrators can get good money, better
So
than authors sometimes.
are those still available? Can people still buy those
No,
cookbooks?
we didn't have Amazon in those days. You can
Mm.
look them up, and you can get them from certain websites, but yes, they're not. You wouldn't be able to get them in a normal bookshop, but you can look them up. Yes, there's the breakfast book, the lunch book, and the supper book by Diana Terry, illustrated by me.
Well, I'm going to add those to the show notes. I'll have you send me some information on that. If people are interested in delving in and researching, that would be great.
Thank you. Yes, so then I've always written. I always loved writing, and as a teacher librarian, I was immersed in the. I have a passion for children's literature, so I belong to a lot of organisations that promote that. And I also run the Sydney Amiga Writers Network group, which is a Christian writers group in Sydney. And I decided a few years ago that I wanted to write a contemporary Pilgrim's Progress. And I didn't know how I was going to do it. And I also wanted it to have a bit of a Celtic Lord of the Rings feel.
Mm.
And I started writing, and I wrote all these ideas. And I was writing a trilogy, a historical trilogy at the same time, and other things, and children's books, because I just love doing everything. And I took a few years to get my head around what I wanted, how I wanted to produce that book. And in the meantime, I have anthologies. I've written a lot of short stories. I actually are in 7 anthologies, some non-fiction. And I'll talk to you a little bit about how I got to my final novel and how it went in Australia once it was published. But I'll just go back to something else that happened. While I was teaching, I was asked and trained to teach drug education at my school. I didn't want to do it at first, but I had to. And I did it for nearly 9 years, and it had a huge effect on me and the students. I just found it so valuable. I could see it changing lives, and even filtering down to my students' family. And when I retired from my job, I couldn't stop preparing lessons and pursuing that. And I realized that and I've always thought, we can live a better life. I mean, I'm talking about spiritual and physical and social and emotional, all of these things. There's better ways of doing it. And I sometimes feel as though I've got some answers. So I started a website called Towards Recovery. I think in America you say Toward Recovery, and it's a Live a Better Life website. And look it up, but just look up. I think if you just Google Towards Recovery, you would get it.
I'll put that in the show notes too.
And I started writing blogs. I provided all these free resources for people with a spiritual option. And I realized that all my writing, or most of it, had this theme of wellness and finding happiness. How do you find happiness? And and what is it? And what is the ultimate goal in our lives, and how important desire is, and idolatry, and all of those things. So you'll find, nuggets of all of this in a lot of my writing. And that became a very important part of the book that I wrote and I released, and it was bestseller, and it was also it's won two awards and the finals of another award, The Craving. And that's my main novel, because it's quite a long novel and I spent years writing it, so I can talk a bit about that as we go along. But that's how I guess that's authors need a tag. They need to have a sort of brand, and that is definitely my brand that's overarching over all my writing. Even there might be a little touch of that in my secular writing as well, if you read it. Yes.
So the Craving, I looked that up. That is, you said it's a YA book. Is that correct?
It is a YA book, but one of my problems is, well, it's not a problem, it's great. Mainly adults are reading it. And I want to get it to the youth, because I have a heart for young teenage youth males, or even males in their 20s, because we in Sydney, Australia here, I have two sons and a daughter, and a lot of my son's friends were going through really hard times. This is a few years ago now, and it's still happening, taking their lives with addictions. It was just a shocking time. And I thought, I've got to do something about this. What can I do? I need to give them an answer. I need to help them. I'll just get rid of that so you can see. I had a screen up in front of my face. So I thought, if I can write a book that shows how an addicted, angry young man can find happiness and redemption and transformation, that is what I want to do, without being preachy or using Christianese.
Right.
And that's basically what the book is. It's a male character. It starts in a music concert, and this guy, William, is up on the stand, feeling really angry about a lot of things. And this beautiful girl sits in front of him, and the stadium collapses, and there's a whole backstory behind why the stadium collapsed. And the girl falls, then he falls, and you can see this heavy beam coming towards her. So he saves her from that, ends up getting a blow himself, and ends up in a coma. And while he's in the coma, she visits him in hospital, because she is injured as well. So she's in the hospital a lot. She actually starts off in a wheelchair, and she falls in love with him. But while he's in the coma, he's on this incredible, epic journey. There's 3 journeys, and to find the truth of his life. And he's in this strange fantasy world, which people, I've been reading my reviews, say it's a bit Lord of the Ring-ish, C.S. Lewis like, which of course is nothing like those writers, but it's a nice thing to say.
It is.
And he falls in love with a princess on the island. He goes on 3 journeys to find the truth of his life. And I have quite a lot of allegorical Christian content in that. I don't say the Holy Spirit, I call the character the counselor. I have the king, the princess, who's the daughter of the king, and I use a lot of allegorical experiences, like when he visits the potter's caves, or when he's shown how a sword is made. There's a lot of swords and knives in it to attract the guys. And the making of a sword is like the making of a life. Okay. And he takes the wrong way and ends up in the city of pleasure, where you get everything you would ever desire. What happens there? Then he goes back. That was a disaster. He goes on another journey to Eladia, which is the house of wisdom, which has 7 columns, and behind the seven columns are 7 doors. And it took me a whole year to find out what was behind those doors.
Wow.
But I ended up using the Sermon on the Mount. So I have doors like the door of love and truth, humility, peace. When he gets to the door of purity, he can't go in. He just can't, because he's got issues in his life.
Wow.
And so he goes into the city of Eladia to have a good time, and has this amazing experience, which leads him back to the door, and he can go in. There's no mention of the word pornography in the book, because it's really for 12, 13 years up, but you can read between the lines there.
Right.
And then when he goes to go into the door of hardship, Aidan says, no, it's not your time yet, because the next journey is the journey of hardship, where he has to save the island, and there's a whole lot of allegorical stuff in that as well. So when he wakes up back in the hospital, where is his beautiful princess, and he's back in the hospital, and he's a totally different person. Now, people might say, well, that sounds a bit far-fetched, but in actual fact, people can have very vivid dreams in comas. And one of my reviewers on Amazon said she knew somebody who had a vivid dream in their coma and met this girl. And then when he came out of the coma, he actually met her in real person and married her. That's a true story. That's pretty amazing. So it can happen.
Well, with God in the mix, anything can happen.
That's right.
There's no end to the possibilities. Now, I wasn't quite sure, you were talked about a contemporary Pilgrim's Progress. Is that the Craving? Is your contemporary Pilgrim's Progress?
It is. It was originally called it the King's Sword. The play on the word was the King's Word is really important in this book. I don't say the Bible, but and some people may read the whole book and not even get the message. It's up to the Holy Spirit to give them the message that he wants them to get. The main message is, where do we find true happiness? How do we attain it? And I guess the main message where I have that is an allegorical story called The Sea King. And I read that to, there would have been about 40 to 60 kids in the audience. I read that, they were teens. And I said at the end, who understands what that means? It was about God being the Sea King, who puts a little bit of seawater in us to make us feel homesick if we're not with him. And some kids put their hand up, their eyes shining, I get it. And others just look blank, no hands up, they didn't get it. Yeah, so it's up to your understanding whether you get the message of the book. But anyway, I'm just not sure I answered your question properly.
Well, I would basically just wanted to know if the Craving was your contemporary Pilgrim's Progress story, because it sounds when you were talking about it, that's what I was getting from that. And you had mentioned you'd written one, but you didn't specifically say it was the Craving. And I see the Craving is quite long, but I can see why it's so long. It's not something you can wrap up in 10 chapters or 40 chapters, or there's just so much to it.
So it's 93,000 words.
Well, that's not that long. I was thinking 404. Well, I'm basing it off, my books are usually around 360 to 370 and they're 90,000 words. So I figured 446, that had to be quite a bit more. So it's not
Mm,
terribly long.
mm. It's really, I'd love youth to read it, but if they're not readers, it might be hard to get through that many words, I think, because young people really like short and sweet things these days. But I did try to put a lot of dialogue into it to make it easier and just make it really, I'm really into using the five senses and immersing the reader into my writing. I've just delivered a course on that on Saturday. So if any authors are listening, I'm putting the presentation on my website in the next week and they can look at it. It's hopefully I think people who listened to it on Saturday found it worthwhile. So just keep a lookout for that. It'll be under author resources on my website.
Wonderful. That's wonderful to have on there. One of the, I noticed you write under Jean Saxby and you write under J.F. Saxby. Is there a reason why you chose two different pen names?
I just felt it suited the book better. Yes, so I have two different pen names. Yes, definitely.
And I noticed you wrote a children's book, The Fangs Visit the Dentist. And I was hoping, when I saw that you had done some illustrations years ago, I was thinking, well, maybe you illustrated it, but when I looked it up, you're not the illustrator of that book.
No, no, I just don't. It's really hard to get the characters right as animals and get them uniform all the way through a children's book. And I found this amazing illustrator who I actually tried a couple, just asked them to send me images of how they would do it, and I chose her. She does it exactly the way I want. I also have a book, the Fangs Visit the Library, because I was a librarian. And I actually used to have rats in my library, real rats, and they lived in the walls. I know. So that might explain the story a little bit better if you read it. But that's free, and it's just for my subscribers. So if you wanted to subscribe to the Fangs, you get that as a free picture book.
I should have my daughter is a librarian. I should have her. Yes, she is. And I should have her. She reads, she takes the mobile library around and she reads to children. And so I should, I'm going to tell her to sign up for your newsletter and get that book, because I think she would really.
That's great. Well, I have two newsletters. I've got the one for the children's books, and I have my Jean Saxby website one, and those people get a free story, The Hunted. And I'm into journals and planners, so my subscribers are lucky they get some of that content free as well. So with the Fangs Visit the Library, I've also actually working right now on the next book, The Fangs Start School. I've actually got a lot of those books because I wrote them for my students over the years. If I couldn't find content that I wanted in my library or the right book, I would write my own and read it to the kids without pictures. And they really liked them. So I thought, if they like them without pictures, then they'll be even better with pictures. So I've got plenty there.
It's like you telling them a story. If you're just telling a story, you don't have pictures. But I think that's very creative to be. And I also was a teacher, but when you told me that you taught biology, and that's not, science is not my husband.
No, I didn't teach it. No, I just, that's what I studied. I studied the biological sciences and physics and plant structure and function and zoology and all of that. But I didn't teach that. I taught kindergarten to year 6, which is like 5-year-olds to 12-year-olds. Okay. And I actually have to teach them, the upper primary, or from year 3 to 12, about smoking and alcohol. It's really hard.
Oh, wow.
At that age. But that's when you can explain what is in a cigarette and how damaging it is to their bodies before they get to their teens. Right. And with the younger ones, we did all about medicines and poisons and going to the doctor and the dentist and all of that. So that's why I have that, I guess I write with that sort of content sometimes.
Very, very unique experiences, because the sciences, that's not, my husband was a marine biology major. and became
Oh,
a chiropractor, but that's where we differ. I'm all about English and he's all about science. And so it's two totally different viewpoints on
yeah.
certain things. So
Yeah.
you have so many unique. So yeah, so you have everything is under a wellness theme. And what you were talking about is kind of your tagline or your branding is wellness. And you
Mm.
explain that very well, I think, and for people to know that. I'm looking at my notes here to see, and then you have now you have do you have other aside from the fang aside from the Craving, do you have other novels that are published?
No, I don't, but I have 7 anthologies that I have contributed to. So, and that takes a lot of time because writing a short story can be up to 7,000 words, and it takes a long time to write those. So I am writing other books, but I just haven't got them out. I'm working on a trilogy. It's a dystopian trilogy
Oh.
um, called The Hive, and it's a continuation of one of my short stories. And that's about a girl. You can read the beginning of that in the Dust Makers anthology put out by Rhiza Press. A girl who lives, it's 2070 and the earth is a dust bowl and they're trying to save the bees. So what they're doing is that they house the bees in these huge buildings in the capital cities, and Cora, the main character, wants to get a job in their hive consortium to save the bees, and what happens and how hard it is to get that job, and this huge tsunami of dust comes while she's in there and smashes against the windows of these skyscrapers. It's very scary, but so I'm working on that, and I have some other books I'm working on as well. I sort of tend to do a lot of different things, as
You're
you can see. I don't
you're
have
all over
money
the
doing
place.
all of this, but I just do what I want to do,
Good for
and
you.
I think it's good because I have expanded my audience, and when I go and sell, like book signings and events, I've got an assortment of things to sell, and if they don't want one, they'll get the other. Like a lot of people have children and grandchildren who really want a Fang book, and other people will want a young adult book, or they'll just buy the Craving for themselves. And a lot of older men are reading that. I think maybe because, and they seem to like it. I think it's because it's hard to get a book with a male character with a bit of romance and inspirational. They tend to be female characters.
You
Mm.
you see a lot more female authors out there. You don't run across very many of them that do the romance. Um,
Mm. And we
and the
need to
other
look
thing,
after our guys. Mm.
I'm sorry, say that again.
We need to look after our guys and cater to them as well. Mm.
Absolutely. I know there's an author out there is becoming very popular named Charles Martin. Have you heard of him? He
Mm.
writes Christian.
Mm.
It has some of that romance. I don't think it's considered romance, but I think there's romantic elements in his books, and he's
Oh,
contemporary. So with
I'll
male,
look that up. I'm not sure whether I'm thinking of the right one. Mm.
and
Okay.
then so that has that, but I would wonder, as you said, older male. I think about the popularity of the Pilgrim's Progress. I mean, that book has been, it's just, who hasn't
Mm.
read it, you know?
Mm.
And
Mm.
I think when you are offering something with that Pilgrim's Progress type storyline in the background, I think it's people want to read something more contemporary that will give them
Mm.
the story in a different way that will maybe connect with people now, because that book was so long ago, and
Mm. That's
wording.
what I thought. And I was looking for something more contemporary. I couldn't find anything that was anything like what I had in my mind. Actually, it was great because I tend to wake up around earlier in the morning and just think. That's when I
Mhm.
do my think. And the whole plot just came to me because I was trying to work out how I was going to do it. The whole plot came to me, and it just the basic outline, of course. And then I thought, that's it, got it. Off I went,
So
and
are
I wrote.
you sorry, are you more of a plotter or a pantser?
I'm a plotter.
You're a
I
plotter.
definitely a plotter. Yes, I like to know the ending before I even start. I don't just write. I mean, as you write, things change,
You
of
do.
course, as you go along. But I have an outline, and I'd be frightened. I'm the sort of person that likes to be very well planned. Like I'll do everything way ahead usually, if I can, and this is just the way I think.
As
I
a
don't be caught out.
as a fiction author, I have several books, and I started with the whole plotting because I'm like you, but I have
Mhm.
discovered that if I can loosely plot it, having, the structure figured out, the Holy Spirit comes in and changes things hugely. It always brings in a character that I had never intended, and all of a sudden they show up and they have one of the biggest faith messages in the story. So I'm like you, where I want to plot, but then I end up jumping in, and I'm not, would not say I'm a pantser, but I'm more of a just let the Holy Spirit write what he wants to write.
Yes, I totally agree with that. And when I'm talking about being a plotter, I'm just talking about the outline, not everything in between.
Right.
I love the way just things just flow out when you're writing, and you just think where, that should be inspirational. If you get really emotional about what you're writing, usually you are on the right track.
Right. You're rereading it and you start crying, and I've done
Yeah.
that. I'll read a scene. My husband likes it when I read my scenes to him, and I'll start reading a scene, and the next thing I know, I'm in tears, and I'm like, okay, that was a hard
Yes.
year. It's cathartic. When we all have past experiences, we all bring that emotion to the table when we write.
Mm,
And some of it, as I believe a lot of it can be like, I had a brother who committed suicide, a Christian, and
right.
and so one of my stories, Providence, is actually inspired by his death, leaving his kids. Excuse me. And when I was writing it, it was the first full-length book I really wrote. I had to rewrite it because I'd started in a dark place. I was so grief-stricken over his death, and then as I rewrote it, it was more cathartic. So you have to bring out that emotion, and how you write anything with deep emotion. If you've never actually lived deep emotion, I don't know how. You can't fake that. You can't make it up. It has to come
No,
from within.
does, yes. And that's the wonderful thing that writers can do. They can present all of those things on the page and inspire and transform with their writing. Mm.
Absolutely. So you have your trilogy is next, and let me get this right. So that is based off of your Dustmaker anthology, this trilogy that you're thinking of.
Yes,
So if
yes.
somebody wants to get a sneak peek, they'll want to get that Dustmaker anthology and read that, and that
Yes,
story in there.
it's a good story for I think high schools. It's got an environmental theme, um, and The Hunted. If you want a free story to just see what my writing's like, you can subscribe. And I I'm into biblical prophecy a bit, and I don't know whether people know about the mark of the beast. It's in Revelation.
Oh yeah.
Well, I do touch on that in the Craving, in that the evil President Lorne requires everyone to wear the raven mark, and where Will ends up is up on a hill where people are living in caves to actually escape from that and to not be under scrutiny because they don't have the mark, and they're called drifters. And in The Hunted, the short story I wrote, it's about a group of young people who also will not take the mark. It doesn't have so much of a Christian message. It's just that they're trying to escape the city because they cannot buy or sell. They're being hunted, and they have to get out of the city and find somewhere safe in the country to live and try to survive under that regime. And I think that maybe even in our lifetime, this all could happen. Who
I was
knows?
thinking the same
Could
thing.
happen.
We're coming very close to that time.
Mm, mm. So it may not involve, depending on whether you're a pre-tribulation rapture believer or post. It's certainly something that will happen in the tribulation times, and we need to prepare people for that.
We do. We do, absolutely. I'm kind of hoping for the pre-trib. That doesn't mean, I mean, you can make an argument for all of them, you know, so there's a
I've
wonderful,
done a lot of study. I will admit that I'm a pre-trib rapture believer. I've been looking at it ever since I was very young because, as I probably told you earlier, I belong to the Exclusive Brethren, and they were tended to be heavily into prophecy, and that was like almost like a cult because I wasn't allowed to mix with the world. So that's why I guess I've read and I love writing so much, and so I wasn't allowed to listen to the radio, have a newspaper, no TV, and I spent a good part of my childhood just sitting in church, and so I read the Bible a lot, as you can well
I
imagine.
bet.
And it was hard. A lot of young people my age will have nothing to do with the church now, but I did a lot of research into it, and I decided I needed to be really sure about whether I was going to continue with that walk. And wasn't really a proper Christian at that stage. And then, I decided, yes, this is real. This is stuff. This is historical. It's real. I can see transformation in people's lives. I'm going for it. And I'm so grateful that I did.
It's hard when you see people will walk away from a church, walk away from the Lord because of the sins of people, you know, the brokenness of people. And the church, all churches are filled with broken, sin-filled people, you know, and if you're going to base your belief off people, you're going to be sadly disappointed every time. And to base who God is off people that are misguided or mistaken, I think that's a real shame. I think you lose a lot. The church has done a lot of damage. The church has done a lot of damage.
And it's unfortunately it's not perfect, but
No. But our God is.
It's better than the bad.
Our God is perfect, and so we can depend on the truth. And you know, I think the Bible is. We just had this discussion, my husband and I, with our daughter over the weekend. She came and she just lives an hour and a half from us, but she came to do a little mom and daughter time together, and she spent the night, and we watched some cute movies and just had some fun connecting time. But we talk the talk, you know, because young people today, they, you know, I'll watch TV, I'll watch church on TV, or, you know, I'll look at a devotional, or I'll do this. And she's a believer. She's a strong believer. She's a prayer warrior. She's amazing. But it's like, you think about a relationship with your spouse, with your significant other. How much time and effort when you first started getting to know that person did you put into them? How much you wanted to know everything about them? You wanted, you know, you were in love. And yet the most important relationship we can possibly have in this world is with our Lord and Savior. How much time are we spending to get to know who he is? And you can only do that. You can only do that by reading his word.
Yes, absolutely. And that's one of the tips for any writers out there. You must do that every day to stay on the right track.
Absolutely.
I mean, I don't do it enough. I don't pray enough. But when I look at what God has done in my life, I can say, I'm a bit older now, I can say, trust his timing. It's good. It might seem really hard. You might be going for years with hardship and unanswered prayers, but he knows best. And also trust. The other amazing thing, I learned a lot from writing this book because it was pretty heavy going writing it. And I wrote it all through COVID. I'd get up early in the morning, write all day, have dinner, go back to work. It just took that long because it was a hard book to write. And I realised that he was working ahead of me all the time. He was smoothing the path, giving me little hints, and like even I had a lot of interesting things happen during that time. I could go into a few of them, but one of them was, you know, Steve Lobby, the Christian agent.
I was actually contracted under Steve Lobby for a time.
Wow, that's amazing. Well, that's just gold, of course. I actually got to have an interview with him by chance, and he helped me a lot with my book and put me on the right track. Said send it to him with a 2-minute video, and that really got me going. Like I really had to get it polished properly to send to him. And it was interesting. I wasn't sure whether I wanted it published by a publisher. I sort of wanted to self-publish, because if you publish with a traditional publisher, if they lose interest in it, they can just withdraw it, and it's no longer there.
Plus, they
If you
expect you have to keep writing for them. You can't have one book and be done. They're putting a lot on the line to publish your book.
Yes, I don't want that pressure. I want to do what I want to do.
Exactly.
And I want to publish what I want to publish. I mean, I have published with traditional publishers, yes, and that's great. But there are certain times when you don't want to do that. Anyway, what happened was, that was a wonderful experience. But what happened was, on the Saturday night, the Craving won, when it was still unpublished, the Caleb Award for Young Adult Writing. And that's quite a big competition to win in Australia. And it was announced on the Saturday night. On the Monday morning, I got a note from Steve Lobby saying that the book wasn't quite what they wanted, I think, for the Enclave. It's a bit too Christian. And I thought, okay, that's good. I think I'm supposed to self-publish this. I had a lot of prayer after that, and that's what I've done. And I could choose my own cover, my own book trailer. I have a book trailer for it. If you want to look up the Craving book trailer.
I actually saw, is it on your website? I saw a trailer.
Oh, it should be. It is. It's on the first page of my website. Yes.
Yeah.
All of those things. So, God works in mysterious ways, and a whole lot of other things happen along the way. We probably can't go into it this time. And I'm so much more trusting of God after writing that book, because I just saw his intervention so many times.
Right. Right. Well,
I love that song, the Waymaker by Leyland. I played that a lot I use music a lot. And if you haven't watched that Leyland Waymaker song, it's so true and so wonderful. And it can help you get through hard times.
well, and that's a perfect place for us to close off this interview. It's been such a blessing, and I really appreciate you sharing that, also that portion of, knowing that whatever you're writing, the Lord is in the mix of it, ahead of you, behind us. We're not doing this on our own. I don't think anybody does it on our own. If I had to be depending on me, I would not produce anything worth reading. I know that for sure. And I know that you're right. He goes ahead of us, and things happen for a very specific reason. And sometimes they're not things, it's not the dream that we have foreseen for what he wants to do, but we're just servants to do what he's called us to do. And, it's like we're all clay pots, right? He gets to do what he wants with us. So
yes,
it's been
so
such a pleasure talking to you, Jean. I really appreciate it. And
thank you so much for having me on. It was just a really lovely opportunity, and all the best in what you do.
Thank you. The same for you. And if you come up with start your trilogy and you want to come back on, you just let me know. I'd love to have you on again. You might even want to sign up to come on to just talk about some of your other projects that you have. We have so much. Jean has so much. I hate to cut her short, but she has so many interesting stories about what she's been doing. So I'm always happy to have you back if that's what you'd like to do. So
thank you very much.
Thank
Jennifer.
you. It's been a blessing, and God bless you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.